Hi, it's Deanna from Futures Past, and I previously showed you an antique Civil War era photo album, and I did a little further poking around, and this album, oh my goodness, it's so hard to get these CDV photos out of these albums. It's almost like they're in there like glue, and it's very like stressful because you don't want to rip the sleeves that are made out of like paper for such an old album, and by pulling them out it's a real pain. So I only did a few, and so far what I found was this is an old New York family, actually a Long Island family, and I purchased this from a seller that came from Southampton, Long Island, and from what I see, the backs of these cards so far are all from like Brooklyn, New York, and Long Island. So this one, another thing, you can tell 1860s photographs or early 1870s photographs by the fact that the writing on them of the name of the photographer isn't that fancy. So going up from the late 1870s to the 1880s and on, they got really fancy, and the whole back of the card had like fancy illustrations and artwork with their name in large font, and the earlier photographs had it pretty much the name of their photography studio and an address, and it wasn't very fancy or very artistic. It was just plain. So yeah, so here's one. This one is from Brooklyn, New York. Here's the Lincoln photo that I showed you earlier, the CDV. And on the back, it doesn't have anything. It's just a plain card. Here's another one. This one actually has very faded writing. So let me try to zoom in. Bear with me. Can hardly see. But later on, I'll get a magnifying glass and I'll check that out. So here's another. This is the lady I showed you before that I said had like an early 1870s hairstyle. You can tell because she had bangs, and generally starting in the 1870s, their hair got higher and more piled on the top of their head. And this one is marked Brooklyn again, New York. There's an old address. I'll Google that later. There's another very early card. And you can tell also an 1860s photograph by the corners. If the corners are squared off, it's generally an 1860s photograph. The later the photos, they had rounded corners. So as you can see on here, the corners are rounded of the lady that was from the 1870s. And then the Civil War era ones are squared off. And actually, when I say Civil War, it could mean generally also after the Civil War, but not quite 1870s. So this photo, this is very old. This is probably 1860s, mid to late. It has a name, and this again is New York. So this is a New York family. One of the photos was a tintype, and the ends were cut off. And the reason why they were generally cut like that was so they can fit into the sleeves of the photo album. Here's another tintype. Here's again of the widow that I had showed you earlier. She's, I think, wearing what's known as a widow's veil, and they had different periods of mourning. I think that means that she's in the first period of mourning. This is definitely mid 1860s to probably about 1865, 1867, and you can tell generally, of course, by the squared off corners. And you see the lines going around it, the border. That generally denotes Civil War era or just after the Civil War photographs. And again, as I mentioned in the previous video, vignettes. So a very small vignette in the middle of the card is also another telltale factor. And this was taken by a photographer on Long Island, in Sag Harbor. And last but not least, out of the crew that I just had taken out of this album, which was painstaking, let me tell you, here's another Civil War, or just slightly after the Civil War photograph, squared off corners, as you can see, a vignette right in the middle, and those border lines I was telling you about. And again, it's by the same photographer in Sag Harbor, Long Island. So I'm going to further, go through this, but like I said, it's really a pain in the buttocks to try to slide these photos out and get them out without damaging the book. And once again, thank you for watching another one of my videos. If you like what you see, hit the thumbs up and subscribe. And I ordered another 1860s, early 1870s photo album, and I'll be getting it in a few days, and I'll share it with you guys. So thanks a lot. Have a great evening, and I'm glad to share this with you. Bye.